we were discussing earlier about the off camera, we were talking about like the topics of like artificial contraception in the church, and can the church give a declaration across the board, right? And I was doing a little bit of research. Dr. Tikhon Pino, he just released a book. I'm sure you're probably aware of it, called Contraception in the Orthodox Church.
No, I haven't actually.
It just came out, so I mean, it's still kind of making its rounds, and it's available on Audible and Kindle. And it's just a quick listen. It's like 2 hours. And he's talking about certain councils that spoke authoritatively on contraception.
Really?
And
sounds interesting.
I think modern councils, like regional councils, like certain councils in Greece and stuff like that. And I think even like the Patriarchate of Romania has made some statements about it. But there's a teaching against the use of artificial contraception. And there was recently in a debate, the Roman Catholic asked the Eastern Orthodox, is the use of artificial contraception inherently immoral? And the Eastern Orthodox says no, and it later goes on to say that it's not something that needs to be settled in Orthodoxy. Whereas when I talk to other priests, they make it very clear this is an issue and it does need to be settled, and that there is a teaching that contraception is not permitted, and it's not, or it shouldn't be permitted.
I don't know of any saint in the 20th century. Of course, contraception for the most of the Orthodox, in terms of modern contraception technology, all that, obviously, is a very new
Right,
topic.
right.
So you can't go back to. I mean, you go back in certain degrees to Saint Basil. There's grounds there, but in terms of addressing it in our day and age, it's a fairly new thing. And I don't know of any saint who says, "Yeah, you can use it and you should." And there's a booklet produced that I sent to you earlier by Father Cosmas in Australia, and he goes through all the saints of the that have spoken on the topic, and there's a universal rejection of it. But doesn't mean we have the same mindset and approach as you see in Humanae Vitae, for instance. We don't. There is a difference. So the difference is not massive, but it's subtle and it's important. It's how we approach it. For instance, there's this idea of natural family planning, and as long as you're in the boundaries, and that to a certain degree that's held by Orthodox. But if the motivation is to avoid children, you'll find a lot of saints who condemn that. Like, in other words, I'm in control. Actually, the perfect is to let God. That's the perfect. Now, pastorally, that'll be dealt with by the priest, and we in Orthodoxy rightfully say, go to your priest and deal with it, because there's 1,001 contexts. And so, yes, the teaching is X, but it has to be applied. And that's what the role of the apostles, the priests, the bishops is in every age. So, having said that there's a consensus of the saints that they reject it, I don't know where some modern Orthodox say, no, we have no problem with it, or we agree to it. I know there's some statements by some synods. That's ultimately not the authority in Orthodoxy. The saints are the authority in Orthodoxy. And so maybe we have a controversy. It's not new. We had a controversy in the 4th century. People talk about the 4th century as the golden age of the church. There were more heretics in the 4th century probably than any of the previous 3 centuries. Another, you had Arian emperors imposing heresy. It was a very difficult 4th century. Why was it a golden age? Because of the confession of faith of the saints. So controversy, problems, challenges to the church have always been here. It doesn't faze us. We don't get, we have some local churches that said contraception is okay. We have saints that, okay, we'll deal with it, and the saints will guide us. And again, that's what I want to come back to. The bishops have to follow the saints. It's not the saints follow the bishops in terms of the hierarchy, in terms of the magisterium, the consensus of the fathers, the experience of the saints. That's what we always point to. They're the ones who make it into the Synaxarion. They're the ones who are commemorated for their life and witness. And so this question of contraceptions, or any other question, ultimately, there's confusion, there's opinions, but ultimately, what do the saints say?
Do you think in time the church will make maybe a universal declaration on it, or
we won't
will
do
come in council?
Humanae Vitae will never come from the Orthodox Church. That kind of approach won't happen, because will we be forced to it? Maybe there'll be a time we'll be forced to say something. There'll be a local church that says this is what we're going to do, but we're not going to want to lay down something that's going to tie the hands of the pastors. I don't think we're going to do that in Orthodoxy. Doesn't mean we're not clear. But for instance, the great approach, the best approach I've ever seen, and I think it's a great Orthodox approach, which is not going to fit into the Western approach at all, is St. Paisios. In the book on family life, and I almost remember the page number, I think it's like 40 or 50 page. It's a huge footnote, and they have a letter from St. Paisius to somebody who's asking them. He's asking them. The couple's asking, "What do we do about relations in marriage? How do we do this?" And he. It's very Orthodox, very characteristic. He says, "These are things that are left to the philotimo." It's the Greek term of each person. In other words, the spiritual struggle and desire of how ascetic they want to be, basically. But what does he do? He gives examples. This is very characteristic of the fathers. They give examples of virtuous couples that he knew to imitate. And he says, well, I know a couple that came together very rarely, had 2 children, and stopped and lived as brothers and sisters. But I know another couple who came together throughout the year outside of the fasts and had multiple children and accepted whatever God gave them. And then I know a couple that couldn't do that. And he goes down basically down the ascetic ladder, as it were, to get to less and less ascetic struggle. And then he says, and then there's people who couples who can't even keep the fast. And that's why there's confession. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing. So he gave, instead of saying, well, this is the legal teaching, this is the moral teaching, which we can do that too, he prefers to say, here's the examples to imitate. Here's the ascetic struggle. Here's the boundaries. He's talking about the fast. We do fast from sexual relations. Some Orthodox don't want to buy that. That's what the saints say. There's a lot of Orthodox today who don't represent Orthodoxy well because they're just going off of, bits and pieces instead of trying to do what St. Paisius is telling this person to do, imitate the virtuous ones, imitate the saints. Now, you might say, well, I can't do that. Okay, well, do what you can. Start where you are. Go to your spiritual father and start where you are. But here's the other thing that's hugely problematic in our day. There's a lot of priests, Orthodox priests, who don't want to talk about sexual relations within marriage at all. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is none of my business. I stay out of the bedroom. And I say to them, the devil doesn't stay out of the bedroom.
Right.
The demons don't knock. They walk right in because this is one of the most sacred parts, if not most sacred parts of marriage.
That's where they are the most.
That's where they want to destroy that relationship if they can, distort it, pervert it, make it into a sexual immorality within marriage. People say, well, the bed is sanctified. Yeah, it's sanctified when we cooperate with the grace of God. It's not automatically sanctified, do whatever you want. The marriage bed is blessed, absolutely. What does that mean, though? It means in the way that Christ wants. So there's boundaries. And the saints talk about the boundaries. The boundaries, I don't want to get explicit, but there's certain things we don't do as Orthodox Christians within marriage that the world says is okay. Absolutely anathema. And you will not have spiritual progress if you do those things. We need to teach people this. So that's what happens within the confessional if the priest is doing his job. So that's where the church chooses to do these things. And its modesty demands that we do that. In that context, right? I've said it online, and I'm embarrassed to talk about it, but I do it because there's so much ignorance about the topic, right? We could go on, but I think that's some of the most important aspects of the
and
topic.
To be fair to the Orthodox Church, I think the witness is clear. You go to any Orthodox church, the priest usually has a lot of kids, you see the big families that are there. So the witness is there. People are doing and living the life, how they should be. So as I did an interview about contraception recently, and the way it was explained to me made sense at the time. So the pastoral application of certain things, and I definitely want to get into the topic of economia. The pastoral application as it relates to artificial contraception. At the time when I did the interview, it actually made sense to me. I was like, I love this approach. Viewing the church as a hospital for sinners.
Yes.
This is a way that you're taking in a patient that obviously has a sickness, and you're trying to examine that and be as pastoral as possible. And then I started looking at what is the Catholic Church, how do they view these things, and do they have some type of economia as well? And I started doing a little bit of research, and I was actually surprised to find that the moral theology in Catholicism is very precise, and it could be, I guess the term could be viewed as legalistic, but it kind of lended in favor of Catholicism in some way. So I looked at that topic of contraception. We acknowledge that it's a sin. And then I looked at, does the church ever condone or justify or give a leniency towards certain sins if it leads to a greater good? And I found out in my research, and somebody can correct me, that no, under no circumstance can there ever be any justification for sin. Even if it's somebody who's struggling, it can never be done. And I saw a post of somebody that it was an Orthodox that they shared, and and they were quoting some popes that had made some statements about you can use it. That he was giving some type of approbation in the sense of like there was like homosexuals that were spreading HIV, so there was an approbation of the use of artificial contraception for that instance. But I looked deeper into it, and that actually wasn't true. It was that whole situation was misrepresented. And then I was like, well, let me look at what the official teachings of the church are. Let me look at things that are magisterial or like official. And it was true that there was under no circumstances can there be some type of economia or some type of loosening when it comes to sin. Would that more or less be true?
Economia is salvation. So I'm not sure. People use the term all the time in a way that sounds like the priest has like a vast ability to do whatever he likes or something, which is not the case. Economia literally means in Greek the management of the household, and the economos is Christ, and we are his. Let's say he's the physician and we're his nurses or his, right? So economia does not imply, I don't know what the particulars are of your discussion or whatever, so you might want to, we can get more specifics if you want, but it does not imply a carte blanche authority given to bishops and priests to do as they like. Or it certainly doesn't imply like I'm going to bend the rules to get people into the kingdom. That approach, pastoral approach, is very problematic. Our role is to present to them Christ, his teachings, his life, the lives of the saints, call them and encourage them and inspire them to imitate them and struggle with them. Now, there is the realm of freedom. In other words, we don't come and Christ doesn't do this. He doesn't come and pressure people into the kingdom, force them, push them into the kingdom. He says, whoever wants to be my disciple. I think this is the realm where there's a pastoral, it's interpreted as a bad freedom or a leniency or whatever this might be, but that's not the case. It's where people are and what they're doing and what they're struggling. They have to freely. Virtue is not virtue if it's not freely chosen and voluntarily engaged in, right? So that's why, again, St. Paisius has not laid out a bunch of rules. He gives examples to be imitated, and he says when this can't be, there's the confessional, there's forgiveness, but. I was going to say further. There was something else I wanted to add to your statement. Economia, and yeah.
As far as economia is concerned, is it the way I understand it? Is it's only applied to matters of like discipline or matters of practice, and not so much like I'm going to bend the rules on morality and let you do something that's inherently immoral for the sake of your salvation, right?
Economia is, try to put a definition on it, it is like a detour, but it always ends up back on the main path, and it never undermines the progress toward salvation, theosis. So it's a temporary, let's say, departure. It never overturns the exactitude or the dogma. It can never do that. That's not economia. That's a departure. And there's plenty of people who call upon economia, and they're actually departing from the narrow path.
Yeah, but today. That would just be like an abuse. That's not.
It's an abuse.
That's not. Yeah. That, the Catholic Church has the same thing.
Yeah, sure. In addition to this whole question of properly understanding economia, there is a patristic principle which you more or less were moving in that direction, and it's very important across the board. And that is, and it's in many church fathers, and that is, a good thing cannot happen in a bad way, right? It's not possible. Like, for instance, in the world, they say, the end justifies the means.
Right.
That's not the case in Orthodoxy. That cannot be the case. And the fathers do not embrace that. So I would say that it's very Orthodox to say you cannot do evil for good to come.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah. That would be like how the Catholic position would be as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
But again, that doesn't mean that the priest must force people to be virtuous. Now, if people come to him and say, I'm not prepared to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. Okay, but there will be consequences. You may not commune very often, but you can do that. You don't become like outside the boundaries of the church. Maybe you won't commune as often. So there's the priest will work depending on the disposition of the person, he'll work with the freedom. And that's probably, my guess, what the priest was trying to get at, is that we're going to bring people along toward virtue. They have to want it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that one makes sense because it's not really dealing with the realm of morality, or like, for example, people that self-abuse or watch explicit content. There would never be like, oh, you watch.
That's okay.
Yeah. No. You watch 5 hours. Let's dial it down to like 1 hour,
Well, there would never be an endorsement of it,
Yeah.
but there would be an ascetic struggle.
Or there would be a help to like, okay,
how do we deal
let's
with
dial
this?
it down.
How do we deal with this? How can you get away from this terrible sin? It's destroying you. You must, but
But never saying like, it's okay that you're doing that. Yeah,
No, of
I
course
get. Yeah,
not.
I get what
Yeah.
you're saying.